President Trump says that both Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a ceasefire and hostage release deal. He made that announcement yesterday evening in a post on social media. In it, he says all remaining hostages held by Hamas will be released. He also says Israel will pull its troops back behind an agreed-upon line. Israel's ambassador to the United States said last night that a 72-hour clock to release the living hostages will begin once the Israeli cabinet meets later this morning to approve the deal. On social media, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the news a, quote, diplomatic success and a national and moral victory for the state of Israel. Last night on Fox News, President Trump offered more details on this deal.
The big thing is hostages are going to be released. It's probably our time would be probably Monday, and you know they're a terrible situation. They're deep in the earth, and they're being gotten, and a lot of things are happening right now as we speak. So much is happening to get the hostages freed, and we think they'll all be coming back on Monday. I'm very confident there'll be peace in the Middle East. I mean, the words peace in the Middle East is something people have been striving for hundreds of years, for centuries, for many centuries.
So there are a few diplomatic meetings we got to keep track of today, because today in Paris, European, Arab and other states will meet to discuss Gaza's post-war transition. Reuters reports Secretary of State Marco Rubio will not attend, but the U.S. is going to have representation there. That meeting will be held in parallel with the ongoing indirect talks between Israel and Hamas. Those are happening in Egypt. I want to bring in MSNBC White House correspondent Akayla Gardner. Akayla, we've got about a zillion stories for you this morning, but I think that this one is one that we've been driving towards for weeks, if not days, once it became clear that there was some kind of a peace plan on the table. Now we see Israel and Hamas have agreed, at least to the first phase of it, and the president is now talking about potentially going to the region. Talk about how all of this played out yesterday in a pretty interesting White House meeting.
Yeah, it was a fascinating meeting, and especially one that I think we're going to be looking back on for years, especially if this plan does lead to an end to the war, and there's many steps that are still to come. But you saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio pass this note to the president, and he said that a deal was very close. We now know, of course, that this deal is supposed to go forward. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of steps that still need to happen. The president says he's possibly going to Israel and Egypt in a trip that could happen just days from now. The White House says he's considering going on Friday. He also left the door open to going on Saturday or Sunday. But some of the still sticking points that we're seeing in this deal is this disarmament of Hamas, which is something that Hamas has rejected for a long time. There's also this board of peace that the president proposed in his plan that would be led by him. And Hamas has been very opposed to any foreign leadership of Gaza, of the Palestinian state. And there's also the question of statehood, which is still very much an open question. We really don't know where the administration still stands on it, and there's certainly a lot of thoughts in Arab nations and Muslim nations that they want to see the Palestinian Authority lead Gaza.
Yeah, and especially when you look at what's happening in Paris, the fact that the French have said that they would recognize a Palestinian state, the fact that they are going to be the ones sort of hosting that delegation as they plan for Gaza's post-war future, I think that is instructive and interesting. We're going to see what we see on this. I always appreciate the still photographers on all of our beats in Washington. They're so talented and amazing, but the fact that they were able to get a picture of the note that Rubio passed to Trump, it says, we're close to a deal. I need you to approve a Truth Social post so that you can be the first one to announce it. I think that was pretty instructive. One of several stories that we're following this morning, because I want to get your input on the next one. This is more on my beat. The government shutdown heads into day 9, and Congress still appears deadlocked over a funding plan. The Senate failed to advance funding bills for the 6th time yesterday, continuing the stalemate as Democrats and Republicans alike continued to trade blame for the impasse. House Speaker Mike Johnson has kept Republican lawmakers home again this week. And talking to reporters yesterday, he said he wouldn't call them back to vote on a separate bill that would pay members of the military amid the shutdown. The deadline for that is like October 15th. That's when the next paycheck is expected to come. And in this case, it won't because the government shut down. Instead, Speaker Johnson said Senate Democrats should support the Republican bill to reopen the government. Then the whole point would be moot anyway. President Trump, on the other hand, told reporters he would support the idea of a standalone bill that pays service members, saying it, quote, probably will happen. Meanwhile, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene continued to disagree with her party leaders on the shutdown, calling on Speaker Johnson to bring the House back into session and warning that Americans will be hit with higher health care costs.
we should be doing appropriations. The House should be in session and continuing that work. But for the health insurance issue, it's happening right now. These premiums are going to go up. What I am upset over is my party has no solution. It's not something that we talk about frequently, but it is a reality for Americans. And it's something that I don't think we can ignore.
It's an interesting interview that she did there with our friends over at NBC. What does it say, and how has that landed at the White House, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is now out here kind of giving Democrats some political wins by saying they have a point. We actually really do have to do something on the ACA. This is a staunch ally of President Trump.
Well, what she has said on this point is she is someone who's always been willing to disagree with the president, even though she is this big ally. But I think the question with the shutdown that continues to come up for me, and I asked the president this weekend, would you support extending ACA subsidies? That's something seems very simple that Democrats would agree to. And he continues to say that he wants to fix Obamacare, that he wants to make it better. He still calls it a, quote, disaster. He's very much railing against it. But Republicans seem to be open to having this conversation about health care. But for them, they said it's only going to happen after they patched the CR. But that does not bring us to a point of negotiations. That does not bring any clear point for Americans for this standoff to end. But they are still continuing to try to force Democrats' hands, whether that means pulling funding. They're trying to just create this pain for Democrats as a way to convince them. But Democrats have said the politics for them is really no longer there. They say you're going to do cuts, you're going to do DOGE cuts anyways. What real incentive is there for them to continue to have these conversations? Because for them, they say, you guys are going to do these same things anyways, so why should we come to the table?
I do also think that there's such an awareness of Trump's desire to just make a deal, any deal, especially when he sees the political landscape on this. Having covered him since 2015, he's always been someone who understood where the wins are. Sometimes that cuts against what his party's actual ideology is, and it's partly why I asked the speaker when I interviewed him, like, what would you do if President Trump said, I want to do an ACA deal, and it's not on the timeline that Republican leaders have laid out? And I think that there are Democrats who are uncomfortable with the shutdown posture, but there are also those who see this as an issue that cuts through the noise because health care is so important. I think it's partly why we saw a few clashes on the Hill yesterday. For example, the two senators from Arizona going to Speaker Johnson's office, trying to spar with him over the shutdown, but then also over not swearing in Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva, who's their colleague in Arizona's 7th congressional district. I mean, all of this is muddied together, but lawmakers are getting frustrated and starting to spill out.
Yeah, I think the question is really, how do they want to reform Obamacare? What does that look like? They keep making allusions.
Well, concepts of a plan, Akela.
But there's some allusion to restrictions. They believe that in Obamacare, there's ways for it to improve the same way they see it in Medicaid. So there does seem to be some kind of pathway, but they're not laying that out yet. It just seems that they're trying to force Democrats' hands, and I just don't know if that strategy is going to work. I hope this is not another 35-day shutdown, but it feels like it's getting to that territory.
Me too. I also just feel like when I talk to my sources, Democrats and Republicans alike, they see enough of what they're seeing as political upside to stay in this posture. I'm still circling October 15th on the calendar because it's supposed to be the next pay period for active duty troops. And I think that is going to be a next level of pain point. That's not to say there's not already. There's one more story that I want to get you on, and it's another one that we've been tracking for several days and weeks. It's the number of National Guard troops sent to Illinois, and that number is growing. A total of 500 troops have now arrived in the Chicago area, and they've been mobilized for an initial period of 60 days. The deployment includes 200 troops from Texas and 300 from Illinois. Their arrival comes despite an ongoing lawsuit from state officials challenging their deployment. U.S. Northern Command says the troops are there to protect ICE agents, federal personnel, and federal property. The state's Democratic Governor, J.B. Pritzker, condemned the move once again, as he had repeatedly, calling it this time, quote, Trump's invasion, accusing the Trump administration of using the National Guard as political props. President Trump responded by posting online that Governor Pritzker and Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson, quote, should be jailed for failing to protect ICE agents. Talk about the escalation here, the way that the White House is explaining it. And do you think that there is any concern on their part that effectively sending National Guard troops to do immigration enforcement, because even if they're not directly doing it, they're kind of there to bolster those efforts, is that something the American public will tolerate?
Well, they continue to see this as a political question for them. They're really tying immigration and crime as two issues that they think is going to help them. And that's what we're seeing them do with a lot of these deployments, is they're asking federal agents to assist what normally would be ICE agents who are already on the ground in a lot of these places to sort of ramp up this presence. But now we're seeing omnipresent troops in a lot of cities where Americans aren't used to having them. But you saw the White House escalate these threats of prosecutions. Yesterday, you had Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem saying that she does believe some of these figures should be prosecuted because cities are constantly under threat. Unclear what she means there. It seems like a lot of the imagery that they're talking about is frankly old from past protests that we're seeing that the White House released these images of. So they certainly believe that there's some reason to prosecute these officials, but that's not totally clear. And they haven't been accused of real wrongdoing.
Yeah, they have not been accused of real wrongdoing. And I think the important thing here, as we've heard several experts and folks that we often turn to on this show and on other shows say that there's a deep fear that this is the White House just trying to normalize sending American troops into major American cities. The fact that Trump said to a gathering of military officials that it was going to be the new training ground for American troops. I mean, that's so fundamentally not how we do things in this country. And it's important for us to just keep an eye on how this continues to unfold. You've really helped us do just that. MSNBC's Akayla Gardner, thank you for starting us off.